I'm going to take you back first 10 years, then 20 years, and finish today in the present. The reason for that is that if we don't learn from history, then we're doomed to repeat the failures of history. And I'm going to describe something called the inclusive e-government part of the European Union's I-2010 programme, which was the Information Society Policy Programme for the years 2006 to 2010. Now, I was very closely involved in the policy creation because at that time I worked for the UK government and was the UK representative to the European Union on e-government. So this is partly my life story as well as everything else. Now, the political mandate for the e-government part of I-2010 was laid down in a declaration by European Union ministers in the UK in November 2005. There were 4 parts to the e-government programme there, and one of them was this inclusive e-government political statement of a target. And you can read it for yourself. The political background to that was at the time it was recognised that although we'd been working on e-government for many years, at least 1/3 of the population of Europe was not engaged in it, was not getting any advantages from it. So that had to be something which was addressed at a political level, and this statement was that outcome. Setting the target for I-2010, so by 2010, that everybody would be benefiting from IT in public administration and public services. So that meant all the disadvantaged groups in particular. Now, there's something else about being repeated in history here, and that sentence that you can see there, the underprivileged or the disadvantaged who rely on public services the most or who use public services the most stand to benefit from putting public services online. Now, if you look back through government and international statements around e-government, you'll find it occurring from about 1994 through to the quote I've made here, which is from United Nations publication this summer, 2014. You'll find those words or very similar combinations appearing all the time. Now, if history is repeating itself like that, there's something curious and interesting going on. And it is always saying they could, they would, they might benefit. Not they have, or they are, but they might. Who are we talking about? Disadvantaged groups, there are many. These are typically UK examples. They're children who get off to a bad start in life, our families who have a combination of difficulties, poverty, isolation, exclusion from society for many reasons, and many of them unfortunately make great use of our criminal justice service as well, because unfortunately many of their circumstances lead them into a life of crime. They do use public services a lot, but they're the face-to-face services: health, welfare, education support, employment support, financial advice. And in the UK, for example, there's been a study which estimates that families with some of these characteristics and disadvantages can cost the state in public services about €300,000 per year. So it doesn't take a lot of them to rack up really big bills. So again, this was part of the political background to try to do something in e-government for disadvantaged groups. But, and let's quote that UN report again, those groups are very highly correlated with those that don't have online access or skills to use the internet. In fact, still the case in 2014 according to the UN. But if we quote the EU's benchmarking report in 2010, what we had been doing in e-government was busily putting online stuff which was completely irrelevant to excluded groups. Tax, collecting money, setting up businesses, applying for university places, all sorts of things, great things, good things to do, but largely completely irrelevant to very expensive users of public services to disadvantaged groups. So, something really had to change. That's where inclusive e-government came in. It says we've got to change what we think about here with e-government and IT in public administration. We've got to focus on the problems that these people experience in their lives and how we can help them through using IT in public services and how we can innovate in public services using IT. Now, this was a novel idea. It was new. It was different. And many people confused it with issues about, do we mean accessibility of e-government websites? Accessibility is important, it was part of I-2010, but no, that's not what we meant. Do we mean digital inclusion? IT skills, internet skills? They are important, they are part of I-2010, but no, that's not what we meant. What we meant was actually focusing on social inclusion. So we've played this game already today, those of you who are here before lunch. For this time, the prize money is huge because we're talking about a lot of money across Europe spent on warm hands public services by disadvantaged groups. Now, I've already phoned a friend, but I think I might need a bit of help here with the 50-50. Now, was the target met? Did we achieve that goal? B, it wasn't met, but we made some really good progress. C, not a lot of progress, but we were getting there. Or D, whack, hit a large hard obstacle very painfully in the form of a brick wall. Okay, let's do the 50-50. Okay, that's well, yes, okay. Still not sure, let's ask the audience. Come on, it's after lunch, engagement, hands up, who thinks B? Yep, okay, who thinks D? Okay, D just about has the majority, and D is of course right. So, I'll share the money out later. No, not really. Why the brick wall? Let's rattle on quickly here. There are some fundamental issues in dealing with a problem like this at European level. Firstly, in the European level community, it's mainly central government representatives we talk to, and mainly central government policy that we affect. Most of the services we're talking about to disadvantaged groups are actually delivered at local level. Clearly the structure varies enormously across countries, but very rarely are these hands-on services run by central governments, except in some small countries. So there was a disconnect, an institutional disconnect, in trying to achieve a target at national level when stuff was actually being done at local level. And the levers between the two are quite weak. Secondly, and quite interestingly, the people who understood what technology could do creatively and innovatively generally understood very little about the problems of social exclusion. No reason why they should, but that's an absolute fact. Similarly, the practitioners, the people who really understood social inclusion issues and social services, knew very little about technology and what technology could do. So that another gap. Very little technology in the front line of public services at that time. And managers working in frontline public services are heavily constrained by budgets, procedures, rules, legislation in most cases, and their room to do something significantly differently is very, very limited. The net result of that is e-government during that period stayed all about websites and all about online transactions. And according to the United Nations, across the globe, e-government is still about government websites and still about online transactions. So we haven't actually moved on a lot. There was stuff done. I won't go through the detail here, but at the EU level there's a lot of activity, and the one thing which remains on the web with that link is an excellent study report which looked at real examples of sustainable multi-channel services addressing the needs of socially excluded groups using technology. It's an excellent report, empirically based, covering the whole of Europe. And in the UK, we did a great deal of work. We had a programme specifically doing that, and we did actually do some successful innovation projects in local government, in these public services for those disadvantaged groups that I mentioned earlier. All of that is written up. There was toolkits produced, innovation toolkits, templates, and they are still available online at that URL. So something did happen. It wasn't too bad, but most importantly, what did we learn? The good news was certainly in all of those programs we found opportunities for technology in frontline public services to disadvantaged groups all over the place. In one exercise that my team ran, we found over 100 ideas, many of which could make a real difference. But actually putting them into practice in social services requires three things that are very hard to find: political will to change and take risk, managerial courage to change and take risk, and the ability to do so, and the legitimate, the lawful base all public administrations work according to law and rules, the legal basis for change, would possibly change the lives of people outside of the current practice. Now, bringing us back up to date, there's an awful lot of discussion in Europe about public sector innovation and ICT-enabled public sector innovation. And I think these lessons that we learned in that period apply very strongly still now. And we have to take them on board, and we have to look at what is required. The skills, the capacity to do the change, the capability to do change in these public services is still very limited. So if we're going to have a move forward in this area, we have to look very carefully at what will enable real progress to happen. What that means, I think, to wrap up with what next and bring us up to date, because there is a lot of talk about public sector innovation and a lot of talk about ICT-enabled public sector innovation in Europe. A vast amount of H2020 and Commission policy goes into this area. And we have to look at what has changed. Well, in terms of what inclusive e-government was trying to achieve, very little has changed. It hasn't really progressed very much over the last 10 years. But we've got a lot less money in social services now. The finances of Europe are something that's changed, and there's enormous pressure on these services. So I think we've got to renew and refocus the effort in this area. But we can't stick with that old phrase that's being used all the time, because this thing about benefiting from online services and transaction and websites really misses the point. The real benefit comes in reframing and redesigning policies and services using ICT to its fullest capability, not just thinking about what can we put online, what transactions can we do, what can we do with the ID and stuff like that. That misses the point for this group, and this group is very important because they're consuming an awful lot of money. We're going to rephrase the debate and ground it into how public services actually work and what the issues are. And I refer to a concept called demand management here, which is the subject of a great report published in January, I think, this year, and the link is there on managing demand, which is all about the principles and the structures and the concepts for matching demand and supply in economic constrained times with these frontline public services. So there's a lot of potential. The one thing that remains is the big challenge here is localism, and any policy that we have to put in place to deal with this has to reflect that we're dealing with a wide variety of governance structures and government systems, and the problems are really focused on the low level. So what can we do at the EU level and national level to make this happen, when what really matters is what happens on the ground down locally. Thank you very much.
And nationally, and what do you think that could boost that and could help in accelerating the process at the national level?
Well, that's absolutely right, and certainly in France we know localities where good things are happening, but where things happen is where there is the political ability at local level to take a view across a number of services, to take responsibility and accountability for budgets and expenditure locally, and start spending the money that is already available in different ways by looking at innovating in the front line of services. That's where the ability to change, that's where matching the services to the real local needs has to happen. You can't do that at the higher levels. So from the higher level, you have to give a certain degree of autonomy and responsibility down at those levels to enable change to happen, and accept that localities will do things differently because things are different wherever you go and wherever you look.